Hi, folks. This is Erin Relford. Listen, it has been a hot minute, a very hot minute. And I know. I woke up this morning just because there were so many people who kept reaching out about IT audit stuff. I was just like, I need to hurry up and do this live video. So we're going to lose all the bells and whistles. I'm just going to go ahead and do this, answer the questions that you guys put out, and make sure that I'm trying to do a good job of it too, right? Just because I realize y'all want some details. And listen, we're talking 15 years of IT audit. So I'm not going to go into that much detail. Some of that is for you to get in terms of experience, but I'm gonna give you enough high level that you kind of either go, yeah, I want this life, or nah, this ain't for me, right? And I even I had to dig up a lot of my old stuff just to kind of like refresh my own memory. So a lot of this is just gonna be riffing. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and jump right into it. The first question we have is from Ruthie. What does a day look like as an auditor? What is the process of it from start to finish? Okay. And are you really supposed to memorize all the frameworks and regulations? Ruthie asked a lot, y'all. So look, let me let me start with her first question. What does a day look like? A day in the life as an auditor, right? Wow. Do we want to talk when I knew what I was doing or when I didn't know what I was doing? Because that could run the gamut. I will say a day in the life as an auditor. Let's just start from the beginning in the sense of you just got assigned an audit. First of all, most audit firms, groups, yeah, right, departments, they will have done what they call an annual risk assessment for the year, which is basically to say, what are you going to audit during the year, right? And so, what's top of mind for the execs? 9 times out of 10, your IT audit manager has been sitting in rooms with the CIO and directors and VPs and SVPs to kind of understand what's top of mind for them, what's down the road 5 years. And so, think like in terms of risk, like it's up to the audit department to decide what they're going to audit, but they audit based on what strategic agenda has been set in place based on the organization. And so you will already know what you are going to encounter for the year if you have a really good audit department. And if you don't, it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes, we just decide to audit something because we caught smell of something, and something's not right. And so we're going to go audit it. So with that being said, if you are, let's say you're a junior IT auditor or you're a senior IT auditor, 9 times out of 10, you know the audits that you're about to be put on. And so you will basically go through a process of what we call an audit program. Your manager is responsible for creating what that audit program is going to be. And when I say specifically, like if you were I'm just going to throw something out there. If you were going to audit AWS, then there is going to be an audit program that your manager has built out that basically says, why are we auditing this now? What are the controls that we are going to test, right? And so that will be issued to you as a auditor. And then it's like, go forth and do what you're supposed to do. But like I said, I'll get into the details of that a little bit later, especially when you talk about start to finish. We'll get into that, right? Are you really supposed to memorize all the frameworks and regulations? Listen, no. Unless you got like one of those memories that just everything you digest, you happen to kind of take in. I didn't. Let's be very clear. That is what. First of all, Google is a wonderful resource. We'll be very clear about that. So don't get into these frameworks thinking that you have to memorize COVID and NIST and all these other things. No, the frameworks are essentially, how do we put this? I'm gonna again, I want to really simplify these things so that you can kind of start to digest what this means for you. When we talk about frameworks, I'm gonna pick on NIST and I'm gonna pick on COVID, right? It is essentially, what Bible is your organization reading from, right? Right? Are you reading from the new is it the NIL? Don't get me to lie, because I ain't opened the Bible in a while. Are you reading from the King James version, or are you reading from the ESV version, right? Like, One says one thing, one says the other, and technically they're both talking about the same thing. They just say it differently. That is how I kind of compare frameworks. Some go into a lot greater detail. Some focus on different principles. So I would say it's not about memorizing frameworks. It's about understanding your organization and which frameworks they follow, because based on that, everything that you do will kind of evolve out of that, right? Okay, moving on. Oh, let's see. What systems software did you use to complete audits? So, Ruthie, that is also going to run the gamut depending on what type of tooling that your organization has. So, when I was at Fox, we used Excel spreadsheets to manage our audits, right? And then when I was at Disney, there was a whole build out of a third party system that they had to utilize. When I was at Mattel, they actually bought a third party software to utilize in terms of our work papers and how we documented things. So it could be different. In terms of systems and software, in audit, dependent on the type of audit that you are going to do, you may audit a bunch of different systems. Again, it depends on the organization that you are within. As an example, when I was doing IT security audits, like I was looking at Sophos and how they manage Sophos. I think Sophos got bought out by another company years ago, but like making sure that Sophos agents were on different computers. And so like I had to understand what that tooling, how that was run. What is that ETL program? There's a software that you basically run ETL programs out of. And like I had to also know what that was. And so you will come across a lot of different systems. Salesforce, that was another one that when I was an auditor, like my last few years of auditing, I had to understand Salesforce because it was a system that they were using and I had to learn how to audit it. So it will run the gamut. Sorry, that's just, it's a very generalized answer, but for good reason. The point of IT audit is that you need to be able to walk into a room not knowing anything, right? And be able to assess based on your training, based on your experience, based on risk, how to evaluate something so that you can understand what's really happening. Like even when they're telling you, "Oh, this is run a certain way," you're kind of going, That's not how we actually. That's not how you're supposed to manage user management, or that's not how you're supposed to delete an account. Like certain things that you will encounter. Like I said, I'm being very broad for a reason because I do not want you. Well, Aaron said no. What Aaron is saying is that it really will vary based on the domain that you are looking at, based on the processes that you are looking at, and based on the individuals that you are working with. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard is the CISA? Are we being honest today? Are we being honest? Listen, it took me 3 times to take that test and pass it. The first time I studied really hard, and I mean really hard, right? But based on how I studied, what I did not understand is that the CISA, in order to pass the CISA, you have to understand how they ask the questions, right? And so I wasn't using their materials. I was using something else and based on my own knowledge. And so that was not the right way to study for the CISA. So just remember, with any certification, you do want to understand, maybe take their practice exam to kind of see how the questions show up, because you may be reading the wrong materials, right? So the CISA, I'm going to be honest with you. The second time I took it, I didn't even study for it. I just walked in and took it. Because it was not a priority for me. And then the third time I took it, I got serious in terms of reading the CISA materials, understanding how the practice exam questions were asked. And then I was in a group of other individuals who were also taking the CISA. So I had accountability partners, meaning I knew they were studying, which forced me to also study. And then we were also kind of like asking each other questions based on like, does this make sense to you? I don't understand this. And so that's why like CISA training programs are great, because you're going to come across domains that you're not really an expert in. And so it's like you need someone to explain these things to you, and especially the way that CISA is looking at those domains. And so I highly regard like training programs that are available through ISACA. Don't get me wrong. You can take those, you can take third party trainings, but you just want to make sure that they fall in line with the same understandings that the ISACA organization, those principles that they put out. So just remember that. Don't be discouraged in terms of CISA. CISA is completely passable. It requires that you put in the right kind of effort, the right kind of energy for it. All right, we're going to move on to Khalil. Khalil, thank you so much for stopping by. Listen, he says, I'm currently a CPA accountant and I want to transition to cybersecurity. First question, would the Security Plus and the CISA certifications be sufficient enough to make the transition into IT audit? So, Khalil, I have seen a lot of CPA, LS, I've seen a lot of accountants, folks who work in finance move over to IT audit, which I find interesting because it's like, sometimes these people are getting in because they're already within the organization and they're trusted based on their working style. So they bring them over. But then these people don't really understand IT. They're just learning. They're learning the control. They're not learning the understandings of how the actual IT processes work, right? So it's kind of a little bit of memorization, a little bit on that side. When you're coming from the finance side, I think one, I want to answer the question, is completely possible to transition, right, to cybersecurity. I think you are going about it the right way in terms of like upping your security understanding, your understanding those principles of security. I think you're going about it the right way. Is it sufficient enough to transition? I think that CISA is. I will always vouch for that one because that is how I did it. But in terms of the Security Plus, I've been hearing a lot of things in regards to Security Plus, and then there's the CISSP. And listen, in my personal opinion, these things can only help you further digest and understand IT security. So it's never a bad thing. But I typically root for the CISSP because it has the longevity. So I hope that helps you out. Your next question, let's see, Khalil, was, oh, it was actually about the CISSP. Is it better? Is the CISSP better for long-term opportunities? Absolutely, I think so. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna continue to say, I am a person that has a CISSP and that ain't working. So I don't get me wrong. I think theirs is very extensive, a lot harder to pass, right? But again, you throw energy in anything, everything's possible. So I am actually thinking about pursuing my CISSP just because I want to be that trifecta of I've got governance, risk, and compliance. Now I have privacy, and then if I have security, I am the golden nugget that everybody wants, right? So and because of that, I'm going for the CISSP. All right. How long? Let's see. What is the busy season like for IT auditors? I literally just kind of felt like the anxiety kind of, oh my God, listen, when I first started out as an IT auditor, busy, I didn't know what I was getting into. Let's be very clear. Busy season was something that was completely foreign to me. So thank you for asking that question for those who just have no clue what busy season means. Let me define that first. Busy season is when you are, okay, there's a regulation called Sarbanes-Oxley here in America. They call it SOX, S-O-X for short. Please don't confuse that with SOC, which is something completely different. SOX, that season happens dependent on when the books close for a company. So if they are a December close, meaning their fiscal year ends in December, right? So their busy season will ramp up, I guess, about August so that they can have all that wrapped up before, if I'm not mistaken. And I actually may have that confused on the other end. And then sometimes the company, their busy season, their books, their fiscal year closes in the middle of the year. So like June, July. So their busy season will be different. I think for the most part, like January through March was like the busy season for most people. And That would mean, so what does busy season mean? You are testing all of these SOX specific controls for a company, especially if you work in external audit. And so you're getting all of that testing done, and you have to get it done before a certain date so that they can report certain information. Oh God, don't kill me for this because I don't remember like their 10K and all that kind of stuff. Like basically the CFO has to sign off on this by saying that we validate that our information is correct, our books are clean, we are not robbing people blind like Enron did. So that's why we have SOX. And so the busy season can last, like I said, it's usually like January through March, and it is torture, honey, because you're trying to get this all done before, I'm just going to make something up, before March 30th date. And technically these dates be like, they be making up these dates, y'all. I really believe. Because like a lot of times you'd move past that date, like some things didn't get remediated before that date. And so there were extra things that had to be done, including testing. And so it's like this made up date, but it all follows this stream of consciousness in that, like, we are doing the right thing based on our financial systems. We ensure that our financial systems are locked up. People can't do bad things. And so that's the point of SOX regulation and SOX testing is to basically validate that our books are clean. All right. And on the IT side, like I said, it's making sure that those financial systems, like access is tied down. People can't cook the books, meaning you can update a record and not have a monitoring or audit service in there that actually records that and says that such and such changed, such and such on such date. So it's those kind of things that's why an IT auditor is involved in SOX testing for finance. But anyway, or excuse me, finance and accounting. So yeah, busy season, January through March for the most part. Sometimes, like I said, I think it was like August through December, depending on when the fiscal year ended for that company. And how, I told you how long it lasts. And I'm in industry right now, and I really only work, what was your other comment? Did I miss that? I really only work longer hours at the beginning, end of each of the month, and close. Yeah, that sounds right for finance and accounting. Can I work remotely at home 100% as an IT auditor? Yes, especially post, I know we're still in COVID, but post being locked up, yeah, everyone is hiring for remote gigs these days. So yeah, if you can find an IT audit gig that is remote, all the power to you. God, I wish that was available when I was doing this work, but that's okay. That's okay. Good on you. And your last question, would it be easier to transition to another tech type role after being, oh, do I have the last one? After being an IT auditor? Am I not proof enough for you, Khalil? Yeah, it's easy. It's completely easy to transfer to another role after being an IT audit. And the purpose and the reason for that, let me pause really quickly to answer a question that just came up. So there are so many types of audit, right? You have external, that is where the big four, if you don't know what those are, there is KPMG, PwC, there is Ernst & Young, which is EY, and Deloitte. Those are the big four accounting firms that basically, they come into companies and basically say, oh, we're going to look over your books and make sure that everything's okay, right? You can hire a KPMG or a Deloitte to do work for you. That is external audit. Internal audit is when the auditor sits within the company. So in the case of like when I was at Fox, I am paid by Fox. I may work with EY because Fox has hired them as the external. And the purpose of that is why do you have an external? And it's because your internal audit is testing things, but you want to bring in an outside independent party to verify that our books are clean. And so that's why you'll use an external auditor. So again, internal audit typically means industry. They are being paid by the company. External audit typically means you are outside the company, being brought in, and you work for an accounting firm. I mentioned the big four. There are also mid-tier terms. I think Grant Thornton is one of them. Protiviti is another. All equally as good. You probably have a better chance of getting into a mid-tier before you do a big four firm. And I'm speaking about, listen, I'm giving you information that's like 10 years old, because when I was coming up within IT audit, like some of those firms only recruited out of certain schools. That may have changed, but that's up to you to find out if that's the case. All right. Vane, let me see. Oh, and did I answer your transition? Sorry, let me go back, Khalil. And so in terms of like getting out of IT audit, yes, because I had done so many different types of audit and I had curated different relationships within the company, I could have gone into any desired position because I had experience working with these people. So if I wanted to work in IT security, I could have made a push for that based on the experience of the type of audits that I had done. In my case, the last year that I was doing compliance type of work, like I said, I was reading the tea leaves and smelling what was cooking, and I saw privacy coming down the pipeline as being like going to be a hot topic. So I leveled up and basically transitioned over to privacy. So yes, it's very possible. And the reason I was able to do that is because working in tech compliance as a technical compliance manager, it was my job to make sure that I wasn't doing SOX. What I was doing in this case was based on the policy that was written over at Warner Media. Were we following that policy according to what people were doing? And so I would do assessments based on the policy to see, like, are they in compliance of certain things? And so I got into privacy based on GDPR, which is a regulation out of Europe. We had to do a big GDPR remediation and was brought in, and as well as Fox. I did a bunch of work over there in terms of setting up controls for GDPR. So that was my transition into privacy, and that's where I wanted to go. So yes, I made it happen. All right, Vane, can you talk a little bit about your experience at KPMG Big Four as an IT auditor? You want the good or the bad? So, Vane, I will tell you that my experience was, first of all, what I do want to say is what may feel like a loss is always a growth opportunity. And that's what KPMG was for me. The reason being, I did it opposite. Most people start off at Big Four and then move into industry. So like go from external to internal. I, on the other hand, did it the opposite way. I was in industry and came into external working for KPMG. So I got thrown into a bunch of stuff where I had to learn fast. Like, this is how things are truly done, right? Because within a company, within internal IT audit, like, they will have their own processes and they do things a certain way. And that is fine for the company because the company has dictated this is how we want to do things. But working for Big Four, you are working across industries. And so there is a higher standard that needs to be, or excuse me, a higher bar that needs to be met in terms of audit. And so I had to learn what that was while at KPMG. So that was a little rough for me. And then just because of the hours, like, people, and again, I'm speaking about 10 years ago. I can't speak for what is happening on the ground right now, but then a lot of people were being recruited out of college. And so they didn't know that, like, working past 8 hours can be a bad thing. Like, you don't know that because it's like typically your first job and that kind of stuff. But I knew. So during busy season, you might be, you may have traveled up to Pittsburgh to do work, and you are now having to, like, you're trying to get, I'm just going to make something up here, but you're trying to get 24 controls tested within 2 weeks. And on top of that, not only are you having to do these walkthrough meetings to understand the process, but you're also having to test the work while on the ground, report the findings while on the ground. And so all that is stressful, right? So you're not working a regular 8-hour day. You are in the office trying to get it done. And so if you were there till 10 o'clock, and there were horror stories of people working past midnight, which was just insane, y'all. But it was an effort to get the work done. And so, and also because, like, it was people's first jobs, they didn't know that they could push back and be like, I'm going home. So with that being said, I want to be very clear. What felt like a loss at the time was actually a true growth opportunity for me because working at KPMG, I got the best education that I needed for audit because I had seen it all from like I was in different industry, different companies, right? So I was seeing how different companies were doing things and was able to kind of like level up my skill sets in terms of how I audit, how I approach people for certain things, and then also dealing with different personalities, which you get that a lot within IT audit. So truly, it. I think working in Big Four is valuable to have it on your resume, just because it really does stretch you. It's a stretch job, right? And the money is there too. So just want to be clear about that. And then also, I had the reason my experience was a little bit different was because I was the only Black person in a group of 40, which is insane to me. Okay. Like insane. You cannot imagine. And like I said, this is like 2011. The dumb stuff people used to say. Oh my gosh. Just clueless about what it's like to not be white. Let me say it that way. And so, I had to put up with a lot of that. I met some really great people, but there was some really horrible people too. So that experience was a little bit different for me. Just it has nothing really to do with the company, but more so just like, some of these spaces you are going to be the only person. And so you kind of have to, you're going to be the only minority per se. And what I have seen to date is that these firms are bringing in a lot more diversity, and I'm so grateful for that. The pipelines were a little jacked up back in the day, but now they're expanding, and so the opportunities to get into a Big Four are much wider than when they were when I was there. And hopefully, your experience is a lot better too. All right, let's see. Let's move on. We have Sean. Sean, what is a realistic turnaround for someone trying to break into IT auditing with no technical experience, education, or training? Teacher with a master's in education, where would you suggest? Listen, Sean, I want to be very clear when I answer this question. That's all going to be up to you. It really is. Everyone has a different path, and I want you to remember that. Some are going to get it fast because they were in the right place at the right time, and some it takes a little bit longer because they are, pardon my French, well, no, I'll use a proper term here, a general term. They are slow rolling their own process by not taking it seriously. So let me be realistic in answering your question as far as the turnaround. If you're coming from a different industry trying to get into IT audit, do you understand what a control is? Do you understand what a policy is, right? Do you understand certain principles? And I'll get into this in a little bit because I don't want to make this video too long, but I'm going to cover some of those controls a little bit later, just so that you understand what you're getting into in terms of transition. So one, Sean, I would say get the knowledge, get the education on what you are getting into. While you are doing that, all right, and you're doing that through one, micro learning, you're either getting into a program that teaches audit, or excuse me, you're trying to chase the degree route. And so I want to be very clear in the sense of you can also be networking, meeting people who are currently doing this work right now. I just posted on LinkedIn about networking and how to network, and so there's a way to approach people. Also, get inside of these organizations. Join ISACA. There is tons of information that they are offering for you to understand what your true transition is really going to look like. So I hope you are networking while you are two, getting an education in terms of how to level up in IT auditing, because you're not walking in the door like with nothing. That's not happening for you. And I want to be completely honest. Like, people really think, oh, I'm just going to go get this certification and I can get the job. Well, no. That's not what you are hearing me say. What you are hearing me say is that getting the certification gives you a true level up, in that it makes it harder for them to say no to you than if you didn't have it trying to apply for that job. So just want to get that out of the way. I'm not going to give you a timeline, Sean, because how many hours a day are you actually putting towards your study of the CISA? How many hours in the day are you actually putting forth towards networking and attending events and workshops and different meetings, that kind of thing, right? So that's all going to rely on you. For me, if to give you what my pathway was, getting into IT audit when I found out about it took me about a year, right? And that was because I had to, one, level up on what I needed to know, understand like what is it that I need on my resume. Two, I was working, right? And so like I was already like dealing with a challenging job within engineering and trying to get that under wraps. And so like I couldn't dedicate 100% of my focus towards IT audit. Three, I was reading the materials that ISACA was putting out. And so that took a little bit of time. And then four, I was applying for jobs and waiting for people to call me. And so it took a full year for me to finally land my IT audit role. But when I did, I was lucky enough to get an IT auditor two position, which basically is like a junior role. Not someone just coming off the turnip truck, right? And so, I lucked up on that. And so it's just a matter of like you meeting the opportunity, walking through the right doors, and finding the right people who are going to give you the opportunity. Okay. Oh, let's see. Uh, oh, you had another question. Where would you suggest I start, and how long would it realistically take to be ready for an entry level position? Where would I tell you to start? I'm gonna be honest with you. Focus on if you've already got a master's in college. I'm not recommending you go get another. I'm really not. But if you would at all would be interested in a potential like 2-year cybersecurity program or certificate program that your local university is putting out. Hi, I see someone's popped in the room here. And then also, just because I'm a true advocate of certificates, I would say start now on that CISA. Read the fundamental materials that they offer. Buy the book. If you cannot afford the current book, there are previous years that ISACA training has been, pushed out, like books from. I'm just gonna like throw some out here. Let's say you can't afford the 2022 book that is posted on their website, then buy the 2018 book, right? Because some of these principles have not changed. The technology is changing, but the principles have not. So that's one way to like make sure that financially you can still get in the door. Read the materials that they have available. If you want to just go ahead and look, I've offered on my YouTube channel, I talked about several websites that offer workshops. LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Udacity, like look up all of these websites and see if they have IT audit trainings to kind of start to get your feet wet. But I'm going to, again, advocate for getting that CISA and reading the materials so that you can go ahead and test. You can shoot, if you're a fast reader and a fast learner, listen, if it's a matter of 2 months, you got your certification and you happen to have experience, and I'm going to talk about how you can use your teacher training experience to utilize this towards audit. There's the potential, like, it may take you 6 months, it may take you a year, it may take you longer, but it really depends on your hustle, right? Because you make your path. All right, in terms of your teacher training and how you can utilize that. So the soft skills side of IT audit requires that you, one, be a good writer, good technical writer, that you, two, be a good communicator, right? And so those things, that's all teaching, honey. That is all teaching, right? You have had to develop like what we have to develop in terms of IT audit programs. You have done in terms of lessons, right, for your classroom. So it basically, you are demonstrating that you have organizational skill. You are demonstrating that you know how to listen, right? Because as a good educator, you're having to work with students. And so utilize all of that in terms of what are they asking for the role in IT audit, and how does that look on the other side as a teacher, and see if you can't do a melting of those into one. That is how you are going to execute and utilize your previous experience to get into IT audit. All right. Let's see what else. All right. Were those all the like basic questions? Okay. So then let me go ahead and get into what I personally wanted to talk to you about, right? I made some notes. In terms of IT audit, I told you about types of audit. External, right? That being KPMG, PwC, the big fours, right, of the world. There is also internal, right, being within a company industry. And then sometimes a company may have a group that does like third party or vendor assessments. That's also a form of audit in some capacity, right? Because you are assessing what a vendor has. So the company may say that a vendor has to have all of these things, right, in order to come in and do work because they're going to be like having access to our information. Well, a vendor assessment will a person will assess that vendor based on these guidelines that the company has put out. And so if the vendor doesn't meet that, well, then that might be a vendor that we can't work with because their security protocols aren't up to par with ours, right? Or sometimes if you are acquiring, you work at a company and you are acquiring another company, right? You may do an assessment of what that company that's coming into the fold, what they have and what they need to kind of measure up to our standard within the bigger company. So those are also assessments that you may do. And then in terms of, there was an earlier question about systems and process. Listen, as far as IT audit goes, you could audit any and everything in the space of IT. So I'm talking about database audits. I'm talking about I've done network audits, right? Like AS400, and that was years ago. Oh my God, I had to do an AS400 audit. Y'all don't want to die. Like that's like the green screen of death, right? There are cloud audits, right? Depending on if the company is using Oracle or AWS or GCP, there are certain things within the space of the cloud environment that you may want to focus on because, listen, a cloud environment is huge. There is so much to look at within a cloud environment, but you may do a focused audit on just the IAM module within AWS to make sure that they are assigning people the right access and the right control. You may do an assessment of the network to make sure that, like what they're whitelisting in terms of IP addresses are not, they're not letting in the floodgates as far as what can get in and what can get out, right? Because when we talk about data at rest or data in transit, right, those things should mean something to you if you're going to work in IT audit. It's making sure that like all the gates are up and only the right people get in and the right information gets out, right? Okay, and then also like in terms of IT security audits, like there may have been a focus on the patch management process only, right? Because a lot of companies don't, why is patch management so hard for people? I don't get it. It's like, Microsoft, if your company, the domain that they use is Microsoft, Microsoft is putting out alerts all the time, like, hey, there's this new vulnerability. Someone like some hackers come up with something new to get into your systems, and we've created a patch so that they don't that is not possible. And so you need to apply these to all of your servers. That's what patch management is in a very simplified way. And so a lot of times, like companies weren't doing that because back in the day, like they were running their own data centers and just not, you may have like Linux or Unix servers on top of like a different I can't remember. I'm trying to think of other servers that, anyway, you may have several flavors. Solaris was one. Oh my God, like I'm telling off on my age, y'all. So you may have different flavors of servers that all have to be patched. And that requires that you have a plan because in a business, things are running on these servers all the time. And so you just can't shut things down and patch it up. And so like a lot of times this all would get lost in the fold or lost in the sauce. And then you have some big hack or some Trojan whatever came through and shut everybody down. So you would even just, all I'm trying to say is that there are so many different audits that could be done based on what needed to be evaluated, like what was a higher risk. And so there's so much information that you need to know. And the point is, regardless of what type of audit you're going to get, that's going to get thrown at you, as long as you have these basic principles, you can audit anything. And so we'll go through that. I'll make sure to go through that. All right. What else did I have notes on that I wanted to cover? What I think an earlier question that someone had was, what's your day-to-day like? And I started talking about the IT audit program. So when you are actually within IT audit, let's just say you're like a senior IT auditor, or an IT audit manager, either one, you could be planning an audit, right? So your director comes down and says, I'm gonna keep picking on AWS. We're gonna audit AWS. Okay, cool. So now I know I gotta plan an audit. So what does that mean? I am doing research within the company to understand where are we in the world today in terms of AWS. Like what services are we using, right? These are questions that I have so that I know what type of controls to test to make sure that like how do we measure success essentially is what an IT audit program does. And so you're going to look at, all right, this is where we should be. And so we're going to test these controls to kind of evaluate to see that we are where we are. But first, let me just understand what services we're using. Let me understand how they're managing it, all of this stuff, right? And so you're going to do research within the company. You're going to communicate and understand who are the right resources I need to be talking to, because there were several times that you would talk to, I'm just going to throw something out there. You talk to the VP thinking that's where you're going to get all your information. Wrong. VP just knows to show up, and like he's not, the decisions he's making is in budget and all that kind of stuff. You want to talk to the actual admin, right, who is running this process day in and day out. And so when you're planning an audit, typically you're reaching out to find out who the right resources are, but then you're also reaching out to ask, like, can you please send us whatever process documents you have available so that we can read and understand what the narrative, like how things should be running according to what you put in place. And then there are also walkthrough meetings to plan, right? So once you've identified your resources, you now got to go interview these people and like, look, they have day jobs. Just because you're running an audit doesn't mean that work stops. And so you have to make sure that you set up the right amount of time with these people, that you're not wasting your time, and so that you're asking the right questions. And so like you may only get a person for 1 hour a week. That's not, like 60 minutes to ask all your questions or to do a really deep dive on something that may be complicated. It's not going to happen. So you actually need to like set up like multiple meetings, or at least set up like what the communication protocols are going to be, so that person knows like, hey, we're going to be requesting samples from you to test, and I'm going to need X report. I'm going to need Y samples to test my controls, this kind of stuff. And so all that needs to be put in place in terms of how we're going to communicate, what they're going to provide, what it needs to look like, because sometimes screenshots need to include like timestamps, right? So that we can prove for SOX regulation, like, this was within the scope of the dates that we set, kind of thing. I'm talking very high level for a reason. All right. And then sometimes you have to plan your travel, because who you need to audit, you can't do from the phone. You can't do virtually. You got to actually be boots on the ground. And so planning an audit would also include planning your travel and making sure that you stay within budget. All of this stuff is important. And then that's one phase, right, of being an IT auditor. The second is the field work and testing. So when I say field work, that means boots on the ground. You actually sitting with people to go through these walkthroughs. And so within these walkthrough meetings, what is a walkthrough? It's walk me through your process. So if I want to understand how you are provisioning users, meaning how are you adding users to a system and deprovisioning them? How are you removing them? And are you doing it timely? Like I may want to sit down with what did they call him back in the day? God, I don't even remember. Whoever that person is, like, that's running Active Directory, right? And I'm speaking from a Microsoft world because that's what everything was done on once back in the day. I would sit down with that person, and basically first I would set an agenda, send them, an understanding of what we're going to be talking about. And then I would have to line up all of my questions that I want to ask so that I get a full 360 understanding of your process, right? And so because I am experienced, I know what questions to ask, but if you're a new auditor, 9 times out of 10, your audit manager has already set up the control and the types of things that you're going to obtain so that you know what type of questions to ask. So anyway, you're sitting in this walkthrough meeting and you're like, tell me about, just, walk me through how does a person get into the system? Like, do they have to fill out a form? Does that form actually say like what business unit they belong to, what type of role they should have? Like, I'm digesting all of this information. And then if they don't have that, well, then now I need them to actually just show me, like, pull out your laptops, share your screen, and show me how you are adding users to this system, right? And then, like, how are you being notified when someone leaves the company? Like, so that we remove them from the system immediately. Like, that's a control, right? And so as termination control. And so you would want to be able to cover that from beginning to end so that you don't have to meet with that person again, so that they have to regurgitate. Also, you're trying to take good notes, right? And so that's why IT auditors typically work in teams. A really good one typically doesn't have to, but let's say, it's a massive audit. You'll have the manager and two other auditors there. So somebody got to take notes because they're saying a lot, right? Another person's asking the questions, and then maybe the manager is just kind of like digesting it all in, trying to already thinking of next steps once we leave this meeting. So that's what a walkthrough meeting is. And that's what is included in your fieldwork and testing. Also, so the testing part, that's field work, being on the ground, boots on ground, meeting with people, getting information, yeah. But testing is like how that shows up in external and how it looks like in industry can be a little bit different. But essentially what you're doing is, one, I am observing, right? So a test would be, I am going to pull 25 samples, meaning I'm going to pull 25 users that have been terminated within the 365 days, right? So within the last year, I'm going to pull 25 random users that were terminated. And I'm going to test to see that, based on what you told me in this walkthrough meeting, I want to see if the process worked like it was supposed to. And within my work paper, right, that's where auditors document their stuff. I'm going to check off, all the stuff that needed to be tested for each sample or each user. And so that observation is me just reading the process. You have a documented process that's understanding that that's true, that what we deem in terms of process being effective, it's all there, right? If you're missing parts within your process that maybe you need to add a form, like it would be because like people are getting the wrong type of access, like that could be something that's observed, right? But then you're testing the effectiveness, and the effectiveness is where I am taking that report where I got the 25 users and actually looking at dates, looking at what role was requested and what was actually assigned. And so those can be what we would consider tests of effectiveness. So you're observing, and then you're testing the effectiveness of that control. All right. And then also in well-seasoned companies, right, there are what we call control narratives. So the control narrative is a process for testing, like a process for a control. And that control may be, I'm talking real old school, y'all. Let's say in your accounts payable, there is a stamp that a person holds, and the things that get paid have to have this, like the invoices that get paid have to have this stamp. That's a control, right? Because you're controlling who can have access to these invoices and who can actually pay them out. And so within that, we may say, all right, we're going to, like, that control, like what I just described to you, that needs to be in a narrative so that the next auditor who comes on 2 years later can understand what that process is, read through it and be like, okay, I know exactly how to test this control, what the control is supposed to look like, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like all these moving parts within IT audit. All right, we talked about field work and testing, testing the set of controls. And then, yeah, let me go through the controls real quick. So like, I'm just going to give this to you just so that you know like the depth in which there can be controls, right? So when we talk about, there is audit and logging controls, there is change and configuration management controls, there are data protection controls, there are encryption controls, identity and access controls. And so I'm going through like information systems right now. just to kind of give you an example. There's incident response controls. There are physical and environmental controls, security and awareness training controls. There is software development. So when we talk about SLDC, did I get that right? Or SDLC? Yeah, it's SDLC, software development life cycle. So a lot of times outside of just doing a regular audit, an auditor can also be along for the ride when they are trying to implement a new financial system that is going to like record revenue and this kind of stuff, right? If it's touching the money that gets reported within SOX, then there are a whole bunch of steps that you need to take. And so through the SDLC process, an auditor will basically ride alongside those who are either developing the system or those who are implementing it. And so you are making sure that the right things got tested, right? Because there's all these things called regression testing. There is UAT, like user acceptance testing. There is go live. Like if these things don't mean anything to you right now, that lets you know that you need to be reading about the SDLC process, right? So there are certain things that need to happen at each stage when you are implementing software. And so an auditor will make sure that those things get covered, or they're doing a back review, meaning that they are going back, they're looking back in history and time to say, did we do the right things? Because here's why all this matters. If they implement software that is calculating something wrong, well, then something went wrong in the process, right? And so something went wrong in the SDLC process. They didn't test that the way they were supposed to, or they didn't validate that certain functions worked the way that they were supposed to. And so now you got reporting numbers wrong. And so now you're screwing up your SOX controls. And so now you're making your CFO a liar when he signs off or she signs off and says, hey, this information is correct. So that's one more audit that you can do. And then I talked about third-party controls. There are even social media controls, y'all. Like now that we have social media, certain like people who have access to the accounts and, making sure that like not anyone can hack the darn thing and say really dumb things on Twitter on behalf of Wendy's or on behalf of Walmart, right? So there are all types of controls. But with all right, I hope that worked. Can y'all still hear me? Anybody, if you can type in just let me know if you can hear me still. Now I'm nervous. Let me make sure that this is working. 2 seconds. Okay. All right. Looks like it is. So what else? We talked about field work and testing. And then lastly, I think a couple other things that I do want to kind of cover. And that is making sure that your one skill that really doesn't get talked about in IT audit is data analysis, right? You will do a lot of that based on you're receiving data. Like you have requests from people, what we call a request list within an IT audit program, and you're receiving information and you want the data to tell you what's happening instead of the person. Okay, so the person is observing. That's an observing test, but then the effectiveness test is let me pull this data and see what's really happening within a system. And so data analysis, if you have skills in terms or understand how to run certain tools like Power BI or Tableau, which is it's actually like a visual data tool. If you know how to work these things, or even if you know SQL, these things are beneficial to you as an auditor, and they further increase your chances of getting a role because you know how to perform data analysis. Or if you know a lot of functions within Excel, that is also helpful, right? And then I feel like, some companies use Google Sheets, and so that's also a thing. But the point is, if you know how to massage data and you know how to pull data and be able to let it tell you what things are happening, that's beneficial to you. All right, another factor within being an IT auditor is work papers. I talked about writing being something that is very important to you as a skill. You have to document everything that you do. And the reason being, someone is going to come along and read your work, number one. And this is years later, right? When someone like a new auditor wants to know, like, well, how did we get here historically? They may come back and read your work papers from 5 years ago, right? So also, I call it the CYA rule. You always want to cover your ass. So if you get challenged in a meeting, like let me give you a scenario. And let me use terminations again. So you were testing terminations and 15 users failed the test. That's bad, right? If you test 25 and 15 people, it wasn't processed the way that they said it was, well, then the process isn't working. And so therefore the control fails. And so now that's a finding. I have to report that. I can't walk away from it. I can't look away from it. I can't just erase it and say it didn't happen. So now people are on the defense, because that means they weren't either doing their job or something broke during the process. Why did this happen? We have to, do a further dive to understand what was the implications, what was the cause, what was the effect of this control breaking, that kind of thing. And so all that has to be reported within your work paper. And you want to get it right, because when people challenge you, you've already done your homework. Instead of being in a meeting and be like, well, y'all failed this. And they're like, why? And you're like, I don't know. Just the dates were wrong. That's not an answer, right? And so you want to be able to say that, so many people got the wrong access because there was not a demand for requiring that a certain person, you validated that this person's request for a specific access got mirrored to another person, but this person that got mirrored was, they had so much access. This was the wrong person to mirror. Instead, that person should have been evaluated for the role that they are currently in and the type of, what is the word? The type of access they should have had. And so there's some nuance there, but the point being that when you are writing your work papers, you're documenting everything from why I tested this, how I tested this, here was my result, here was the cause and effect, right? And here is my recommendation on how you fix it. And so that work paper, like I said, at Fox, we used Excel. At other companies, they had a whole tool designated for work papers. Sometimes it's just a regular document. But the point being, once you have documented these work papers, you can now pull out information to add to your report findings, right? Because everything's going to get wrapped up into a report, a technical report. And in most companies, and I see your question, Beyond Fly. I'll answer that in just a second. In most companies, like the reporting structure, so like as an example at Fox within the IT organization, so if they were on the TV side, the CIO on that side got a copy of this report, the SVP got a copy of this report, and if it was like platforms and ecosystems, like let's just say that's the department name, that VP was getting a copy, as well as anybody else who was relevant in that conversation. So, if you're if you're just a manager in that department and you messed up, like the CIO is going to know about it. And so that's why people care about this report so much. There is so much politics that goes into the words that you use. You can't use harsh language in these reports because people be in their feelings, y'all, when it comes to these these closing meetings is what they're called. The closing meeting is when you actually issue your report and you go over the findings. And by the way, by the time you have gotten to your closing meeting, everyone needs to already know what's in that report, because if they don't, hair on fire. I've seen it happen. It's just bad, y'all. So it's like when I talk about those communication skills, part of your job is making sure that you communicate things to the right people at the right times, so that when it all comes down, it don't come down on you. So, excuse me. Beyond Fly, let me say one other thing about this report. So you want to think about, in terms of like the report being where you're spilling the beans, like your communication style. There are actually things that you can go and Google for how to write an audit report, to understand those terminologies beyond fly. I am almost certain that there is someone has probably put up a website. And matter of fact, like I actually have a book. They actually brought in a consultant who had wrote like how to write audit reports. And so one, let me give you the plug. Let me give you the real plug. Go and Google audit reports. I guarantee you there are PDFs out there, copies. A lot of times universities will do this, right? Because all the information is public, or government agencies. And also go look up SOC reports. They're called, so there's SOC 1, 2, and there's also 3. They mean different things, and we're gonna run out of time because I don't want this video to be long, y'all. But you can look up an SOC report and find out all these terminologies, right? And what they actually mean. Because basically what's in an SOC report is called user considerations, or UCC, user something considerations. But what it does is it reads through all the things that a company should have if they're using a system, right? And so it will use certain terminologies. And if there's something that you don't understand, go out and Google it. It'll, like, the crumbs are there is what I'm trying to say. But an SOC report is a good way to kind of start to see all these terminologies that auditors like to use. Yeah, the report writing process, how to write reports. Again, if you're trying to shortcut your way through this system just to kind of get, certain information to inform yourself before you go get educated, there are workshops that you can take on technical writing. Hell, Google even has a certificate, if I'm not mistaken, that's a technical writing one. Like, all these companies are trying to do the right thing. And so see what type of certificates they have available. These things are there to just kind of put you on the game. But once you get it, it's like up to you to go get the experience in it, right? And so there are all kinds of ways to do that. I talked about that in the beginning of this video. All right, is that it? I think that's it for now, y'all. Like, I covered a lot. And I didn't even get into like the real detail using the proper terminology, right? If there are more questions, leave your questions on the video on YouTube, right? Leave it in the comments. I'll do another one of these because I already know folks are going to reach out and be like, I saw your video and I had questions about this. I get this all the time. And then people want to meet one-on-one. I'm trying really hard to try to find a way to like coalesce everyone together so that we can meet at the same time and answer these questions, because I got a life and I want to go enjoy it because it's Saturday, y'all. Anyway, thank you for stopping by. I hope this was I hope you got something out of it, right? Even if it was like what certain things mean now or what the world is colored with, I hope you got something. Not all of this is going to make sense. And the point is to give you just enough nugget or just enough carrot to go chase so that you actually want this thing. I'm telling you, it's worth it. The money is there in these type of professions, and they really do open you up to the world of IT and the different things that you can do in it. So I will see y'all next time. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate all y'all. It was great seeing you.